Hey everyone, it's me, Mitch. I'm one of the pastors here at Suncrest, and you're watching episode 2 of a series we've been calling Practicing Spirituality. Let's get going.
How's everybody doing? Good. I'm glad you're doing good. Y'all look well rested. See what I did there? Yeah, I was actually up in the booth when Jamie was doing that at the start of the service, so I was very impressed with how many hands went up, both with good experience and also I'm giving it a try. This really is about working it out in our lives, so I'm very, very grateful for that. Over these 4 weeks, this is the whole idea here, is we are practicing spirituality. And I've defined that in this way, that we're trying to experience more of God in everyday life. And this is what I need you to know about you. I don't know if this is how you see God, but I know that God is crazy about you. You may not think of it that way. You might even anticipate that he's probably mad or angry or something else. He's not. He's crazy about you. And he would love to have experiences with you. And the only limiter on that really is whether we're open to it, whether we create the space in our lives, like with rest, so that we can experience him. He is a gentleman, right? So he's not going to shove his way in. He's not going to force himself upon you. But if you open yourself in some of these practices, I think you'll experience him in everyday life, not just in an environment like this. I mentioned last week that these practices have kind of two categories, abstinence or engagement. They're either things that we need to kind of stop doing in our lives to create room for God, or there are things that we need to start doing in our lives in order to engage God. Now, last week, rest is one of those practices where we stop doing something so that we can experience this. And today, I have for you an experience that's an engagement experience that we're going to walk through together. I can't wait to share that with you. But I just want you to think about this. I only have the room this month to share 4 practices, spiritual practices, but there are core spiritual practices, and like, for example, one we won't get to over this month is the practice of fasting. That is an abstaining piece. It's to abstain from food in order to have a certain experience with God, to demonstrate a dependence on God, to ask God to intervene in such a way. It's a powerful experience. But in some ways, spiritual practices are almost endless if you let yourself think about it and you think about, what is God trying to do in my life right now? You know, I got this concept from Dallas Willard. He wrote a book called Spirit of the Disciplines. He was actually a professor at USC in Southern California. And one of my favorite stories about Dallas Willard is that one day he was lecturing, and at the end of one of his lectures, he was kind of going back and forth with a student who was challenging some of his thoughts. And for people who know Dallas Willard, they know how sharp he is, how smart he is, and that given the chance, he could have just put this student in their place. But they were kind of going back and forth, and the student said something, and then kind of like time was up, proverbial bell rings, and he said, "Class dismissed, we'll see you tomorrow." And one of the students came up to Dr. Willard afterwards, and he said, "Hey, listen, you can't just let that student get away with that. Why didn't you say something back to him?" And Dallas Willard said, "I am practicing the discipline of not needing to have the last word. I am practicing the discipline of not needing to have the last word." And I'm like, oh, I need to practice that discipline, right? Maybe you do too. It's an abstaining discipline to say, I don't have to do all that. I can give room. It's so powerful. So we've been doing these 4 practices. Practice number 1 last week was pace yourself. You know that I'm doing 4 practices over 4 weeks. I'm asking you to do each one during the week I teach about it. And then at the end of this, I'm going to ask you to take the one practice out of those 4 that was most meaningful, resonated with you the most, and then carry it forward, hopefully this year and beyond. It's such a significant thing. So practice number 2 today is holistic prayer. And just so you know, before we're done today, we're going to have an experience together in the room where we're going to practice this practice. I think much more than me telling you how to do it, us starting to do it a little bit while we're together here before we walk out these doors is the most helpful thing for you to experience what this is really like and to go into this week doing some holistic prayer, as I call it. I do think there is something that is probably most helpful for me to teach leading into that practice, because it's possible that you and I have a misunderstanding about God and about ourselves that would keep us from experiencing this in the most beautiful and intriguing ways. So let me work through that, and then we'll share the experience together. This is the foundational flaw. We misunderstand ourselves in so many ways. But one of the ways we misunderstand ourselves is we misunderstand ourselves in a way that causes us to be disintegrated. I want you to see yourself holistically as an integrated human being. You know, we talk about human beings and our experience, and we'll say things like, oh, yeah, mind, body, spirit. You know, when Jesus is teaching, he says, hey, love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. We can think about our experiences. Sometimes it's physical, sometimes it's emotional, sometimes it's spiritual, sometimes it's relational. Those are, of course, all different components to who we are. But when we pull those apart too much, we actually don't live as integrated human beings. We live as disintegrated. And like, you see how the word works. Like, it's disintegrated, but it means we're just disintegrated as human beings. Sometimes you may have had someone tell you, well, the spiritual part's not important, right? Pay attention to the physical, pay attention to your mind, pay attention to the emotional, but the spiritual part's not important. If you're sitting in this room, chances are maybe you actually think the spiritual part is important. But you may have had someone tell you, hey, that emotional part of life, you need to zip that up as quickly as you can. Don't let anyone see you cry. The expression of emotions is actually a sign of weakness in your life. These kind of messages get taught to us. And so then we take this part of our life and we remove it, we diminish it. We sometimes even think of it as harmful or evil when it's not. It's just part of who we are. And we should never leave that apart from who we are. Sometimes, and I think this happens in churches actually, the physical part of life is sometimes diminished. Sometimes we would talk so much about the soul that you would think, well, the soul is really the only thing that's important. Some people even misunderstand heaven in such a way that you think we are going to be disembodied souls that are just floating around in heaven forever and ever and ever. It is not like that. The scriptures teach very clearly that you came into this world with an embodied experience with a body, and that our experience in heaven will be with your body. It will be a resurrected body. In the same way, Jesus' resurrected body was different than his pre-resurrection body. Yours also will be different. But the embodiedness of our experience, the physical part of our experience, is not something to be cast away or diminished. We are integrated beings. Now, this is critically important for us to see ourselves in a proper way. You'll start to see that some of the practices that we have, they'll shape you. But you know this. If you're hungry, that's physical. If you're fatigued or tired, that's physical. That affects your emotions. And vice versa. And we shouldn't pretend it's any other way. If we can see ourselves accurately, then we can appreciate that maybe some of the spiritual practices that we will put into our lives, including the one this week, has to look at ourselves holistically and appreciate the physical, the mind, body, spirit totality of who we are, and that would actually let us experience God. Now, maybe the most important line in this phrase here is we misunderstand ourselves. The word that we tend to use today to talk about how we see ourselves is our identity. And identity is an important word. It is how you conceptualize yourself. And if you conceptualize yourself incorrectly, or if you take any one of these aspects and either say, well, that's who I am, or you take any one of these aspects and say, that's not important at all to who I am, we miss it because we're integrated beings. It's so interesting to me. Over the last few years, I think we're having more conversations about race in our world. It's a physical difference, that people have. And it's so interesting when I listen to people, because some people I'll see and they will essentially make their race the only identifying factor of who they are. I'm like, oh, well, you're going to be way off. You're going to be disintegrated in your life if you are just defined by your race. It's an important part of who you are, but it's not the totality of who you are. On an equal level of absurdity, I sometimes will hear people say, maybe you've said this, be careful, say, oh, I don't see color. I don't see color, as if it isn't important at all, as if the physical aspect and the experiences that we have that are related to that aren't important at all. Well, of course, it's neither the totality of who you are, nor is it to be dismissed as nothing important at all. It's important that we integrate this together. It is interesting to me that I think in ways that we're working through right now, the way we see ourselves related to our physical bodies and our identity related to our bodies can become a very significant conversation. But it's the integration of those two things that help us. I mean, think about this. I don't know if you've ever had the experience, the sad experience of knowing someone who was anorexic. I've known some people who are anorexic. When you're anorexic, what happens is, you look in the mirror and you see yourself as fat, but you're not fat. You're thin. Sometimes thin to an unhealthy level because of how you're now behaving, because you see yourself. And any good psychologist who's working with someone who's anorexic is going to have a conversation with that person, not to affirm how they see themselves, but instead help them to see the reality of their physical being and bring their mind and their identity into alignment with that. Who we are, our mind, our body, our spirit, our emotions, it's the integration of those in a healthy way that helps us see ourselves accurately. The scriptures teach this, of course. Let me give you a few passages. 1 Thessalonians 5 says, may God himself, the God of peace, if you want to find peace, this is what we want, sanctify you through and through. Sanctify you. Like you're a being. You're a physical being, you're an emotional being, you're a spiritual being, and he wants to get through and through in that. In fact, he says this, may your whole spirit, your whole soul, and your whole body be kept blameless. This is about embracing that we are holistic beings, not just spiritual or not just physical. In 1 Corinthians chapter 6, there's this interesting passage. It says, do you not know that your bodies, your physical bodies, are temples of the Holy Spirit who is in you, whom you have received from God? I said this last week, that if you're a follower of Jesus, that the Holy Spirit, God himself, comes and takes up residence in your physical body. And this conversation in 1 Corinthians 6 is actually about paying attention to your body and the physical appetites that we all have. You have physical appetites to eat. You have a physical sexual appetite. Like those are things. And the appetite itself is not evil. But it is possible to take that appetite and let it go, give it no parameters, give it no control whatsoever. And it actually comes at a great cost. This is the point, not just to your body, but to how you see yourself, to your identity, to your soul. We're integrated. In Romans chapter 12, it says this, I urge you, brothers and sisters, in view of God's mercy, to offer your bodies as living sacrifice, holy and pleasing to God. There's something about the physical nature of who you are in your body that God wants to receive from you, that we would offer ourselves to him. Now, I don't know how you think about that. Do you think about, literally, I don't just want to offer my spirit to God, I want to offer my body to God. One shared experience we have, of course, is in this room while we're worshiping. And, some of you are more expressive than others while you're worshiping. I try genuinely not to judge people for being too expressive or not expressive enough. It is interesting to me sometimes to talk to people who, it's almost like you're trying not to move when we're worshiping, right? The frozen chosen is what I call that group of people sometimes. I actually had somebody come up to me once and they're like, Greg, I've been coming to the church for a while, and I feel like we would kind of click with each other. And he said, I've heard you name, sports teams you root for. I like those. Your humor, it's kind of my sense of humor. I like conversations about the kind of things you're talking about. He said, but there's this thing that, I've seen you standing in the corner over there during worship time, and you're a little weird. Like, I think we're like each other in every other way except this way. And I'm like, I'm not weird. I mean, I'm not inviting you to watch me over here while I'm singing. But like, do I move a little bit? I move a little bit. It's not dancing. I mean, it's not crazy, but this is totally my point. Please hear this. I'm not trying to control something in a worship experience with God. I'm trying to let it flow, right? If it wants to do something in my body, I'm going to let it do something in my body, right? Otherwise, I would quench that physical aspect just like everyone else. And then I'm going to tell you exactly what happened. This same person who's like, I think we're like each other except for that thing. I'm like, well, it's okay. Like maybe you're just a more stoic, unexpressive person. I'm not trying to be judgmental. And then we went to a Bears game together. Right? And at the Bears game, he would stand up, he would yell, it would all flow out of his body. Right? And I've seen some of you, when your son scored the winning goal, well, here you're like this. But there, it's like, oh, and this is just my point. Like let it go. Offer your body to God. You're an integrated human being. Now, the idea of spirit and flesh, I think, is a misunderstood concept in the scriptures. Spirit and flesh are not good and evil. I think many people perceive that. And even some of the philosophers in the time when the New Testament was written believed that the material world was fundamentally evil and the spiritual world was fundamentally good. But that is not what the scriptures teach at all. This is what the scriptures teach, that the spirit and flesh are higher and lower. They actually align, and they're not the same, but they're aligned with one another. They affect one another, and it's not good and evil, it's higher and lower. Now, I want you to think about this with me, because it's going to be important in the practice that we do together in just a little bit. This is what the scriptures teach, but it's so fascinating to me that lots of smart people, even people who aren't Christians, essentially kind of come to this same conclusion. And most of us aren't very good. We're not very good at appreciating rank order to say neither one's bad, one's just more important than the other. We almost always want to pull them apart and say one's bad and one's good. But that's not the way this works. Abraham Maslow, you know him because he came up with Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? He's the one who understands that, like, you're going to meet your physical needs first, and if that's done, then you're going to pay attention to safety, and safety is good, then you can pay attention to relationships. And Maslow is not a Christian. He's a smart guy, not a Christian. And at the pinnacle of his experience, he called it self-actualization, right? He didn't have any room for something supernatural or from God, so in my view, that was kind of, I don't mean to disrespect him, it was kind of the best he could do in the way that he saw the world. This is actually something he wrote. He says, the so-called spiritual life or higher life is on the same continuum with the life of the flesh or of the body, such as animal life or the lower life. And for anyone who's paying attention, I hope this is helpful for you. What he's relating the physical life and even the physical part of our life to say, yeah, we actually share that with animals, right? And he is ranking them, and I would rank them too. I would want you to know that, human beings are more valuable than dogs, right? Every human being is more valuable than the most valuable dog. Now, I've had this conversation in circles before, so I know some of you are mad at me right now, right? Because you think I just said dogs aren't valuable, but I didn't say that. Remember, we have trouble with rank order. We want to create good and bad, but this is just an appreciation that there are higher things and there are lower things, but they actually line up with each other, which makes them integrated, and we really, really, really will do better if we can appreciate that they're integrated, but they're not the same. Paul, when he wrote the book of Romans, he actually helps us with some terminology here. He calls them different realms. This is what he says in Romans 8. He says, those who are in the realm of the flesh cannot please God. Now, this is an important thing to pay attention to. You can please your physical needs, and pleasing your physical needs has some importance to it, but it is at the level of physical need, and there's something else out there that pleases God. You, however, followers of Jesus, are not in the realm of the flesh, but are in the realm of the Spirit. It's a higher order. They pay attention to each other. In 1 John chapter 2, it says this, the lust of the flesh, not the flesh, the lust of the eyes, not the eyes, the pride of life, that's what doesn't come from the Father. And so, what is he saying? He's saying, pay attention to your lusts. Be honest about your lusts. Because you have an appetite. You have an appetite for hunger. It's meant to be satisfied. But you are not meant to be a glutton. You're not. And if you become a glutton, it actually has a negative effect on your emotional life and your spiritual life. It's actually one of the 7 deadly sins. Your sexual appetite, the lust of your eyes. Like there's an appropriate expression that can be beautiful of a sexual relationship, but it is within certain parameters. And if you just decide, well, I'm going to be defined by that, if you just give it pride, oh, this maybe the big one in this room, right? The pride, actually, let me revisit something earlier. If you were here worshiping and you felt a little bit of a sense of like, man, I should express this, man, I should raise my hand for a minute, man, I should, like there's something flowing through me, but you squash it. And you ask the question, why do I squash that? Why do I squash it in church, but I don't squash it at the Bears game? The answer to that question is pride. It's because you're paying attention to the social dynamic of who we are, and you're wanting to be perceived in a certain way or not perceived in a certain way. And that pride of life, that's what's going to mess things up. It's not life, it's not the flesh, it's not the eyes. And this is the big deal. Spiritual practices shape our physical, emotional, and social realities. And spiritual practices are shaped by. This is what it means to be an integrated being. The spiritual practice of rest, it will shape how you feel physically. It will shape different parts of your life. And if you're not resting, if you're tired, your physical nature will shape your spiritual practices. It is fully a two-way street. Maybe some of you remember this thing Jesus said on a certain occasion. He was praying. He had a couple of his closest followers go out to watch out for him. And they fell asleep. They were tired. And he just says, couldn't you men keep watch with me for an hour? The spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak. Just appreciate that every spiritual practice we engage in, it will have an effect, hopefully a beautiful effect on your physical life, your emotional life, your social life. And every way that you handle your physical life and your emotional life and your social life will have an effect on your spiritual life. So with that in mind, I want us to practice holistic prayer. Holistic prayer integrates the mind, the body, and the spirit in order to connect with your Creator, the one who created your mind and created your body. A couple of weeks before Christmas, I had us just at the end of one service when we were talking about the peace of God in our lives, do a breathing prayer. Some of you were here that weekend. I'm sure you'll remember it. And I appreciated everyone in the room kind of at least going for it for a little bit and practicing with me. I was working out of this book right here. It's a book called Breath as Prayer. And I had a dozen of you, I think, come up and say like, hey, Greg, what's the name of that book? This has been meaningful in my life over the last year. And it's been a helpful practice for me for like kind of calmness that pays attention to what the Spirit is doing, but also what your breathing is doing and the mind part of this. This is not emptying your mind. This isn't some Eastern meditation with some mysticism to it. It's actually filling our mind with Scripture while our lungs fill with air and appreciating that we are whole beings.
As you're starting your new year and developing some new habits that hopefully will be formative for the rest of this year, I want you to come and check out what's happening here in our building. Head to suncrest.org to learn out all about what's going on, from kids birth through 5th grade on the weekends, from students 6th through 12th grade on Monday nights, to the services and experiences that we have for you and your family. I want you to get plugged in. Head to suncrest.org to see all the amazing things that you can take part of as you explore what change looks like in your life.
Darkness run for cover, but the miracle that I just can't get over, my name is registered in heaven. I believe in signs and wonders. I have resurrection power. Still the miracle that I just can't get over, my name is registered in heaven. Oh, my praise belongs to you forever. This is my testimony from death to life, 'cause grace rewrote my story. I'll testify by Jesus Christ the righteous. I'll testify. This is my testimony. This is my testimony. Sons and daughters, bought with blood and washed in water. Sing the praises of the Spirit, Son and Father. Our God will finish what He started. Oh, our God will finish what He started. This is my testimony from death to life, 'cause grace rewrote my story. I'll testify by Jesus Christ the righteous. I'll testify. This is my testimony. This is my testimony. If I'm not dead, you're not done. Greater things are still to come. Oh, I believe. If I'm not dead, you're not done. Greater things are still to come. Oh, I believe. If I'm not dead, you're not done. Greater things are still to come. Oh, I believe. If I'm not dead, you're not done. Greater things are still to come. Oh, I believe. This is my testimony from death to life, 'cause grace rewrote my story. I'll testify by Jesus Christ the righteous. I'm justified. This is my testimony. Oh, I'm alive. This is my testimony from death to life, 'cause grace rewrote my story. I'll testify by Jesus Christ the righteous. I'll testify. This is my testimony. This is my testimony.
Every week, we pause everything we do, both in person and on demand, to focus on the love of Jesus during a time we call communion. It's an opportunity for those of us who follow Jesus to recenter, refuel, and refocus our lives on what it looks like to be centered on Jesus. We do that by taking bread and juice in person, but on demand and online, go ahead and find whatever food and drink you have available. It reminds us of his sacrifice and his love that fuels and guides us in everything that we do. And this is honestly a time for those of us who don't follow Jesus to explore, to reflect on what we've heard, and to be open to the idea that God might be getting your attention right here and right now. And if that is you, I want you to know Suncrest is a safe environment for you to explore what it is you believe, alongside lots of other people who are exploring also. I'm going to put a timer, some scripture on the screen, and invite all of us to eat and drink when you're ready, or reflect. Thanks for joining us. This is a wrap to episode 2 of Practicing Spirituality. I hope that you'll join us next time. If you liked this, go ahead and hit the like button. If you know someone who needs to hear this and maybe needs to put this practice into their life, hit the share button. And if you want to see more content like this, head to YouTube, our YouTube channel, and hit the subscribe button. I hope you join us next time, and I hope that you experience change in your life.